Hey team, welcome back to the show. The crew is back at long last. It's been a while. We are getting into training mistakes part 7, talking about biceps today. So finally, Natalie and Aria back here with me. I feel like it's been forever. I guess it's just been 2 weeks since I've recorded with you guys. Natalie has been traveling the world, flexing on the Guatemalans, teaching them how to train. Um, but today we're going to be digging into the most common training mistakes around biceps and how to actually get your physique to change. Sounds like this is one that everybody is excited about. Andrea, do you have any bicep work in your programming?
No, I don't. Not anymore. All my direct arm
Crazy.
work got pulled out. Yeah.
Natalie, you have a decent amount. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
And you enjoy bicep training?
I do.
Okay. I have a lot
Like
right now.
like jacked arms.
I do like when you have like a lot of like a nice little arm pump. It looks good.
Yeah.
When you're wearing like a well-fitting, like kind of oversized shirt, but you still have a nice little arm pump and you're still like filling out the sleeves a bit, and like you can tell like I look kind of jacked and I'm not showing it off too much. I think that's a good look. So I can appreciate it. I've come around to arm training more than I used to. I have a ton in my programming right now, so I kind of have to be. Anything on the importance of direct bicep work. And here we could almost say like elbow flexors, because we're also going to talk about like brachioradialis. I think that's an important consideration here. When it comes to like developing the physique most clients want, do y'all think bicep training is an important part of like, is that a big part of your programming with most clients or no?
I think even though we would classify bicep training as like an isolation or accessory kind of movement, it is one, even if it's not a priority for the client, like they don't particularly care about training their arms or like anything of the sort. It's something I'm pretty much going to put in everyone's program because, as
Yeah.
we'll discuss later, there are direct ties to things like shoulder function and shoulder stability. So just positionally getting people into some of those positions um, is going to have important carryover for shoulder function. I actually just had this conversation with a client the other week. She's like, "Hey, I'm pretty good with my arms. Like I feel great about where they are. Can we just like work on something else?" And I was like,
The fuck
"Not
you
so
are.
fast." Yeah, I was like, "Slow down." I said, "No," and I literally said, "Not so fast," because we have had some shoulder issues crop up with you, which honestly, I'm happy to say with this client, like we're in really good shape there. Shoulders are like functioning properly and like we haven't had any issues like in the last couple months, but we want to keep it that way. And I was like, these aren't just in your program like because we want to build out your guns. So
I think that's a very, very good point. I also do think that when you see someone's goal physique shots, a lot of times there is more both bicep and tricep, well, both arm tissue there as a whole. And I think that people underestimate how important that is. I find still, I don't get as much like I'm scared of my lower body being bulky, but I still get a lot of like, I feel like my arms get super jacked too easily. It's like, I don't actually see that happening very often. So I'm curious to see how that plays out for us. But I think it is a lot more important for most people's physique goals than they might realize. And yes, it is also very important from a shoulder function, shoulder health perspective, which has a big downstream impact on our upper body training as a whole. So,
biceps can like really balance out like if you have like a really great set of delts or something, then they can really kind of help to balance out that whole like arm shape, versus
mm,
just having these like boulder shoulder delts and then like nothing, which to be honest, I think would be I can't really think of someone who just has like a totally like jack set of delts and then like no arms whatsoever. But I think you get my point here is like if you're envisioning the arm, you've got this nice cap to the shoulder and then it's and then what? Like
it's
we
kind of like when someone has like like the Kardashian butt, like when there's like huge glutes and no hamstrings, it's kind of like that
yeah,
look, like a BBL type thing.
yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
agree. Okay. Anyways, let's get into some context setting with some foundational knowledge you need for this episode to be helpful. So basically just understanding some anatomy and function of the biceps. Now, we actually have two primary muscles to consider within what most people think of as the biceps. We have the biceps brachii and we have the brachialis. So the biceps have a short head and a long head. Now, the short head connects to the coracoid process of the scap. So basically just the front of your shoulder. Think like right under your collarbone. Not basically it attaches to your scapula right under your collarbone, and it's a whole, we don't look up a picture of it if you better want to understand this. Look up short head bicep attachment insertion or origin. But then from there, it's going to attach to the radial tuberosity, which is one of the two main bones of your forearm. And then we have the long head. So basically short head kind of like more so on the inside of your bicep, long head more so on the outside of your bicep, which attaches to the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula. And then again, attaches to the radial tuberosity, which is again that same upper or a bone of the upper forearm. So basically, the attachment to the scap of the long head of the bicep is important, alluding to what Natalie mentioned before with how this impacts shoulder function. So your shoulder joint is basically a ball and socket joint. Now, the long head, what it does is it essentially runs up your arm, and there's this little groove on the side of our arm that is kind of cut through that ball and your upper arm bone that goes into the socket of your shoulder. The bicep, the long head of the bicep actually runs through that groove, kind of along the upper outer portion of the upper arm bone, through that ball, over the top of that ball in that groove, and then actually attaches to your scap from there. Super interesting. Now, when we're looking at function, but basically that does make it a biarticular muscle because it crosses both the shoulder joint and the elbow joint. Now, when we're looking at your biceps function, it is going to, of course, pull the forearm towards the upper arm in a curl-like motion, aka elbow flexion. It is going to help rotate the upper arm outwards, aka supination, so twisting from like a neutral grip to a palms up grip. But again, since it crosses two joints, it is biarticular, so it also acts on the shoulder joint. It really acts as a shoulder stabilizer. So load on the biceps do really help to stabilize the scap. And then the long head pulls the arm away from the trunk in abduction and turns it inwards, whereas the short head helps pull the arm back towards the trunk. And then we have the brachialis, which is often forgotten. So the brachialis is basically like a muscle underneath the biceps. It kind of pushes the biceps up, makes them appear larger, and really makes up a very large part of the size of the arm. So brachialis attaches from the upper arm bone to the ulna. So doesn't cross the shoulder joint, just attaches to your upper arm, and then your ulna is going to be the other main bone of the forearm. Now, because it is attached to the ulna rather than the other main bone of our forearm, it basically doesn't contribute a whole lot to pronation or supination. So basically doesn't contribute, or it isn't really impacted as much by these differences in wrist positioning. It is going to be our strongest elbow flexor. So it is, when we're looking at like a curl-like motion, it is the strongest in that group. And again, it does add a considerable amount of size to our arm. And then just a quick shout out to our brachioradialis as well, which if you look at your forearm, it is like it's the largest muscle of your forearm, right? The inside of your forearm right below your elbow, just grab that. That is your brachioradialis. We would probably think of it as a forearm muscle, but it also does help with elbow flexion, so it contributes to anything we're doing here. Now, just some quick application. Basically, the more we bias supination, so think like twisting your pinky outwards, the more we bias the biceps, but the brachialis is still working. A neutral grip, we will typically get a little bit more brachialis and brachioradialis, but the biceps aren't shut off completely. And then the more supinated we get, the more we shift towards brachialis and brachioradialis and less bicep. So if we're going to do like an overhand grip curl, like palms facing down, that would be a way to really bias more of our brachialis, and brachioradialis, you would really feel working a lot there. Anything else to add to all of that? Everybody looks bored. Okay, let's continue. Talking through some favorite bicep and brachialis movements, and we will also break down common mistakes we see. Anyone want to throw out a first in terms of favorite bicep or brachialis movement? Let's just say bicep movement and consider brachialis in there going forward.
I will almost always, if I have one movement for biceps in somebody's programming, it's almost always going to be an incline bicep curl. because you get more into that like elbow behind the body position, and it helps. I feel like that helps quite a bit with like people who have postural issues, which is basically all of us, and get like nice and open and work the biceps in that position.
Okay. I like an incline dumbbell curl. Um, that or a face away cable curl. I'm depending on the person. If I want to keep things simpler, I will typically just program an incline dumbbell curl depending on what I think their capabilities are. And also like where is this on our priority list? If it's someone where it's like, hey, I just want more function than anything else, and I'm not too concerned with like their arms getting jacked, they don't care too much about it, I might bias that more. But basically, yeah, elbows are going to be a bit behind the torso. We're training in more shoulder extension. So can challenge the biceps more at longer muscle lengths. We can basically stretch it more. Now, with like a incline curl, incline dumbbell curl, that movement's still going to be like hardest in the mid range. The cool thing about like a faceway cable curl, which is a very similar movement, we're standing instead of seated, and of course using cables, is we can adjust the cables to make the resistance greater. Like if we want to bias the lengthening portion more, for example, there won't be quite as much resistance drop off, so we get a little bit more challenge. But I would that was gonna be like the incline dumbbell curl and or the faceway cable curl. Again, I'll choose one of the two, just kind of depending on the person there. Natalie, are you in agreement with all that?
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add. I would say one of those is probably in like every single client program I have. And sometimes I'll base it as to like their gym setup. So a lot of times, like it's just easier for them to grab a bench and dumbbells versus the cables.
Mhm.
Um, and then other times, and or it will be, how they perform one or the other. Um, I know I personally perform the incline dumbbell curl worse than the cable curl. Like, when I was having like a lot of shoulder issues, I was like trying out different things, and I remember like we tried an incline dumbbell curl, and it was like it was awful. Like it just looked so bad. It was like, yeah, right. Let's just put that back on the cables. It was just better positionally for me, and like wrist considerations as well. It's a little bit harder, I think, but that's all I have to add there. It's a great movement for a lot of reasons, not just jack biceps, but also putting you into that nice like shoulder extension position that more people need to spend a lot of time in.
Okay, okay, I like it. So when we're looking at mistakes, let's start with an incline curl, then we can move to face away cable curl. So one of the most common ones I see is the bench height. People setting that up, or the angle of the bench, people setting that up wrong. So we should be set up. We do want our elbows to be ideally a bit behind the torso. That's going to be what will really allow us, because again, of the way the long head of the bicep crosses the shoulder joint, us being in more shoulder extension is going to allow a little bit more stretch on the bicep. But if we set the bench up to where the incline is too low, basically you're leaning too far back, your shoulder blades actually will start to tip forward. That is when we know we are probably set up too far back. Now, some of this is just intention with your posture, but a lot of times it'll be like a 65-ish degree incline for most, like 60, 55 to 65-degree incline for most people is about where we'll be at home. We don't need to try to get like, if we go to like a 30-degree incline or like way, way deep back there, a lot of times we'll again be the position where scaps, shoulder blades are actually tipping forward. We will be a lot less stable than we want to be. So that is going to be one of the most common mistakes that I see. Natalie says 69 degrees. Why didn't you just throw that out there? Hilarious. Natalie says 69 degrees is the optimal.
Usually that's your moment.
Thank you. 69 degrees is the optimal. But important consideration with our incline curls. What else do y'all see with incline curls?
I would say the incline curl and the cable curl have this in common, but the elbows shifting forward is the biggest one. And this is the one I love to talk about because I think I made this point in our delt episode when we were talking about like rear delts or even like lateral delts. But in any isolation movement, like we want to isolate one joint. And so if the elbows are shifting forward, that means that our shoulder joint is going from flexion to extension, right? So like therefore we've got two joints working now. We've got the elbow joint and the shoulder joint. So we're
Mhm.
trying to isolate the bicep. So we want one joint working, and that would preferably be the elbow joint. So a lot of times this is just because like the weight's too heavy or maybe lack of awareness as well. Um,
I would agree. I see that a ton. I mean, I feel like every time I'm coaching incline curl or yes, a face away curl, I'm coaching that. And you're
yeah.
almost like turning it into a front delt raise
Yeah.
hybrid. It is pretty wild how much some people will actually like, there's no movement at the elbow joint at all. It's basically just again like shoulder flexion until we get
Hmm.
like elbows by the sides and then we're curling, which yes, definitely
Yeah.
isn't what we want it to be. Anything else with the incline curl?
That's one where I would say that sometimes that can be maybe a little bit easier to teach on the dumbbells versus
Hmm.
the cable because at least with the dumbbell, like you're sitting, right?
Right.
And you're supported by a bench. So if you're doing the face away curl and you're standing, you've got even less stability. But same goes for both.
Okay. So then when we're getting into a face away cable curl, Andrew, anything common you see there?
Similarly to the dumbbell curl, those mistakes apply on this one too. And then I would also say this applies to the dumbbell curl too, actually, but with both of these, like flaring, like almost pointing the elbows in towards the body and like really externally rotating and curling out to the sides. I see that a lot, especially on the dumbbell one, but on this one too. Um, it doesn't align properly with how you should be moving in order to maximally like lengthen and contract your bicep whenever you're completely turning your like the pit of your elbow out toward the side.
It's like overdoing supination.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I see that, and I don't sometimes as well. It's like I don't even know how you get yourself in this position. It's kind of crazy how much people can externally rotate. Um, Another one similar point is where your elbows are, really where your forearms are relative to the cable. So, easy way to think of this is think at the front of the curl when we're curled up, the cable should basically be running, the line of the cable should basically be running directly under your forearm. It's in a straight line with your forearm. A lot of times, what you'll see is, let's say somebody's using a functional trainer that's like 4 foot wide, and unless you're Natalie, you're not 4 foot wide, right? So I'm 5 foot wide actually, but
Wide but tall.
she's 4 foot tall and 4 foot wide.
A
Um,
scooter.
Also wearing a SpongeBob SquarePants shirt today, ironically. Um, but we want basically, again, forearms directly over the cable. So the line of your forearm should be running directly with the line of the cable. So if you were, again, like using a wider functional trainer and you have your elbows right next to your sides, the line of the cables will be like way outside of that line that your forearms would be running. So you'd want to actually flare your elbows out a little bit wider. Or another way I often describe this is think about pointing your elbows right at the pulleys. This is one that really it seems like takes people a while to pick up. I think just like curling with your elbows flared out from your sides rather than just like upper arm right next to your rib cage is a weird one initially. But if we're not doing that, basically the line of force of the cables and the way that runs through our elbow is going to typically create a little bit of pain over time. So if you are having pain with like a face away cable curl, that is one of the considerations on what might be causing it. What else y'all got on a face away curls?
Also, like walk forwards a little bit too. Like if you don't
Correct.
have that functional trainer where you can actually move the arms like from side to side.
Mhm.
So because they'll converge. If you walk forward, it gets more narrow, like the further out you get. You're adding resistance as well, but
It's a good point.
Or do
Uh,
single arm.
or a single arm. Another one similar to that is actually standing too far back, too close to the pulleys. So basically, at the bottom of the rep, your arms are like straight over the pulleys, and the cable is just running in a straight line with your arm. So what you will feel there is there's basically no resistance at the bottom of the rep. So we do need to be standing typically IQ just a couple feet in front of the functional trainer, and again, it depends on like how wide it is relative to you. But we don't want to be standing like right over the top of the pulleys, or again, there's not going to be any resistance at the bottom. Again, if we're setting this up, we're typically setting it up to where we want a decent amount of challenge in that more lengthened range. So this is going to be like the opposite of what we want. Anything else on face away curls? In terms of pulley height, how high are you typically telling people to set the cables or set the pulleys?
Just at the bottom on those most of the
Some
time.
And
Yeah.
somewhere between like bottom and knee, like ish,
yeah,
like mid shin, depending on what they have available and what looks good.
yeah. And again, it will be something we can play with depending on what the person or what we want here. Like if we're really trying to bias more lengthened, and what this looks like will be relative to the person. We basically want to set that up so at the back of the rep, we have a 90-degree angle between the pulley and the forearm. So that would typically be like cables are a little bit higher. Lower, typically we're getting like it's still going to be a good challenge throughout. It's going to be kind of a little bit more mid-range, which I don't like. I don't like to set up any, honestly, anymore. I don't like to set up any bicep curl movements to where they're like an extreme lengthen challenge. I think most people just really don't manage it well, and we typically just get like more pain around the elbow joint there than anything else. Um, but that is something that we can kind of play with. I typically just like somewhere between, yeah, like the as low as it can go in knee height. I find for most people is kind of the sweet spot. Cool. Anything else on those before we continue? All right. Second nomination in terms of bicep movements. Natalie, what do you got?
I think if we're going on like frequency that I have in people's programs, I guess I would have to say like some form of a preacher curl.
Oh yeah, big fan.
Um, yeah, like those are going to be my top two is either the dumbbell incline or the face away and a preacher curl. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I would say if I'm putting together a program for someone who isn't like heavily focused on biceps, it is almost always going to include like one variation of those two, depending on what they have available. What is it you like about a preacher girl?
Um, I mean, in general with our bicep training, it's kind of like if we can draw a parallel between our conversations about like lat training, for example, how we're like, hey, if you're doing program design, you want to think about having like, you know, a vertical pull, horizontal pull, and something kind of in between. So like with bicep training, like we could kind of have a similar conversation like with arm position. So like you generally want to have like something where the arms are a little bit behind you, something where the arms are a little bit in front of you, something where the arms are like maybe more in flexion. You know, and so the preacher curl fits that bill of like having your arms in front of you a little bit. It's pretty stable. It's relatively easy for most people to set up. It's a good one, I think, to teach like training intensity. Um, there are definitely some nuances you can get into in terms of like setup and body type and like, you know, single or bilateral. But in general, I just think it's a solid movement.
Yeah, I would agree. Probably my personal favorite bicep movement. And again, just very simple. For most people, most gyms have a pre-show curl machine, and not very many of them are all that shitty either. So we can typically like just like load up and go pretty quickly and get a good stimulus, and it's not really that hard to figure out how to do it. In terms of mistakes, y'all see anything that comes to mind immediately with preacher curl?
Not fully lengthening and just lifting up off of the bench. Like once somebody gets to like an almost straight position with their arms, instead of fully lengthening because it's harder there, they'll just lift their entire upper body forward, up off the bench, and then come back down and finish curling on the way back up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, I see that a lot. It's like rather than letting your elbow straighten all the way, your arm straighten all the way, you just lift your body up. Yeah, that isn't. I've never. Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I haven't like thought of it like that, but yeah, it's quite common. Um, Anything else on that front?
I like one that I see is kind of once again, like what we mentioned with the face away curl or the dumbbell incline is like too much shoulder movement. So like shrugging the shoulders up. And again, like we're trying to isolate the bicep, so we really want that movement to be coming at the elbow joint. So like shoulders popping up, like hunching over kind of thing, initiating the movement.
Yeah, very similar to what Andrea said. It'll almost kind of look like as we lower the weight, you're shrugging way up, and then you kind of like lean back and pull your shoulders way down. And there's almost like it looks like a complete like shrug and depression cycle through every rep. You should be keeping your gaps fixed as you curl.
I think you can.
Go ahead.
One thing I just like to tell people is like, hey, think about just like keeping your triceps like flat on the preacher bench.
Hmm.
Like you just don't want them popping up. You don't want like elbows popping up kind of thing, or like shoulder. I keep saying shoulders shrugging, but that's what it is.
I think that that's probably from trying to go too heavy. Because with most machines, these are going to be pretty overloaded in the lengthened position, like hardest with your elbow fully straight, and then easy, fairly easy from 90 degrees and then closer. And so if you're loading it for it to feel hard at the top, it's going to be way too hard at the bottom. And so instead of getting into that position, you are going to shrug up and tip your scapulus forward.
I think that's backwards. Most like a dumbbell preacher curl will typically be a little bit harder, but it depends on the cam of the machine. But a lot of preacher curls will be like a little bit harder at like more into the short with how the cam is set up. Like a client,
The
somebody will
top?
fail. Yeah, somebody will fail along a lot of preacher curls. Somebody will fail at the top first and still be able to get like partials on a preacher.
Okay.
But if we're looking like a dumbbell curl, like a dumbbell preacher curl, but it does vary depending on the cam of the machine, right? But if it's just like this is way too nerdy, but if it's just like a round cam, I mean, typically we would still fail in the short first. So I mean, it really just depends. But I find a lot of times like what you're talking about there is just the person has also the seat set up like way too low
Yeah.
to where, like you said, Natalie, we should have the tricep flat. Basically, we should be able to set up to where your entire upper arm bone, before we start the rep, when our arms are extended, we can just keep that flat against the bench and we can keep our shoulders down, right? We shouldn't have to be like shrugged way up to be in this position. Um, that's going to be one of the biggest things I see, as well as people just initially don't know how to set it up correctly. Do y'all like a dumbbell or barbell preacher curl also, or just like a machine?
I don't. I think that they're personally a little bit scary. Like I just don't like the feeling on my elbow in that movement at all. And then it's like I said, it's like completely no resistance at the top half of it. Um, so I think it's maybe like a lot of my own personal bias. I don't really program them unless I can use a machine or a cable.
I feel like a preacher curl machine is one thing that like most gyms have.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
just can't envision myself like purposely programming outside of that, like just for kicks. Like, um, if we have like access to like a cable curl, I don't like setting that up organically, but like if you have like the Atlantis cable curl, preacher curl,
Mhm.
like I like those.
Yeah, I do too. If you have like which is pretty uncommon that someone has, I think like a really good setup for it. I do like too, like a cable curl at like or even like, so like in my programming for a while, before I was back at the gym, I had a dumbbell preacher curl, but had it set up on like a 45-degree bench,
Yeah.
which I'm too tall to like be able to do that standing. So I had to be in like a half kneeling, but I couldn't kneel all the way down position, which in itself was kind of a problem. But that, like the resistance profile of that is nice, where it's not like that extreme lengthened overload where you feel like you said, Andrea, like your bicep is just going to tear. But so that is something like if someone doesn't have like if the preacher curl bench they have isn't a good setup to do like a barbell or dumbbell, and it just like gives them elbow issues in the length and range, we could like do a single arm and adjust the height of the bench. You could either make it like steeper or like a lower incline, right around what, like 55-ish, 69 degrees would probably be where you're the most lengthened biased, somewhere in there. But that's something we could play with. But then we get into like, okay, well now we do have to do the single arm, which I mean, I have single arm preacher curls twice a week. I like them now. They're okay, I guess. But I mean, I do one on the prime and one on the gym Leco, so I can live with it. Do y'all considerations for like single arm versus bilateral? Do you guys program single arm for clients often?
I like single arm because it's easier and better to line up. It's just more a little more nuanced for your body um and structure, but like I will do that more if arm training is a priority and or we're dealing with like shoulder, elbow, or wrist pain. Like that's where I'll kind of like bring that in. Or if someone's just a total nerd and like they've got the time. But like I always like to say with isolation lifts, like when you're going unilaterally versus bilaterally, like something like a preacher curl, for example, you it's not like doing a split squat. Like if you're doing like a rear foot elevated split squat, like you probably need like 3 to 4 minutes between legs, right? Like just
You
between
don't
legs.
rest your 3 minutes between arms for preacher curls.
Yeah, so my point here, right? So, if someone's like, "Oh, time is really a consideration." It's like, is it really like that much more time when we're talking about something like a single arm preacher curl? Probably not, but I guess one could argue mentally it feels like a bit more. So like I said, if we're not having like issues at the shoulder, at the elbow, or at the wrist, and like we're not trying to be like highly niche specialized, like really just like arm specialization phase, I'm more apt to like just let someone go bilateral like on a preacher machine or something like that.
Okay. So, but you did say it's easier to line up. Explain what you mean by that.
So kind of just like depending on like how your scaps like sit and like what your how your shoulder joint like works. It's kind of difficult for a lot of people to get into that position where their arms are like out in front of them and they're like perfectly like supinated and like everything is like lined up. Usually like we have like forearms flaring out and like shoulders hunching and like obviously if you're using a preacher curl machine, this is a fixed grip, right? Unless you have like swivel handles, and we're talking about a little bit more specialty equipment there. But like your traditional preacher curl machine has a fixed grip, so you're fixed into this like supination, which means like your shoulders are like and elbows are just like locked in to this position, which is not ideal for a lot of people. Which again, to my point, is why like if we're having issues with the shoulder, elbow, wrist, like that's when I would want to kind of like play around with that a little bit more. But if none of those issues exist and we can get into this comfortably, I mean, this is why we also ask for training videos. So basically, I'll tell you if you suck at this, and we'll put you on something else where you don't, or I'll tell you how to make
Like,
it better.
perfect. Anything else on preacher curls?
Really easy to get
Nice.
a good pump.
It is. Oh yeah. Um, okay. I would nominate then. I like a single arm cable hammer curl when we're talking about like a more brachialis focused movement. I just find that is one where when you're trying to do for some reason it feels much harder to do the elbows like flared out more bilaterally with a hammer curl type movement, just like we talked about with like a face wave bicep curl. It is much harder to do that with a like hammer curl versus a more supinated grip curl. And I also really find that it feels a bit better when with like a hammer curl you come across the body a bit more. I don't know. I feel like I should know why that is and I don't. But if you come across the body a bit more, I find that feels a little bit better. I also don't as much like depending on, and it depends how much someone's biasing this. Like unless again, typically like unless it's a male client who really cares a whole lot about biceps. I don't have anyone who's like trying to compete in figure or anything at the moment. Um, we're not too deep into like bicep specialization, but it's not something I'll program all that often. But in that case, I do really like a single arm face away. I don't because the point I was gonna make is if we're doing like a cable hammer curl, like holding onto the rope facing, I find a lot of people like the range of motion they get at the bottom, of course, isn't as good, and then the grip kind of gives out, or it just like hurts their hands trying to hold on to the rope. Where I do like the like face away a bit better. Thoughts on that?
Uh, like hammer curls, like a neutral grip, a lot for again people who are having shoulder, elbow, wrist pain. I feel like
Mhm.
that's the song I'm just singing all day today. It's people with problems. um, but like we're it is technically like the brachialis, right? But we're still gonna have some very productive like bicep arm
Oh, for
training.
sure. For
So
sure.
like I think, people do make the mistake here of like, well, I can't do that. Like it has to be semi-supinated or like or I'm not doing this properly. And it's like, no, like we're still gonna get work done if we're doing like a neutral grip curl, like you're good. And that is often like a way around some of that pain and discomfort, like as we work through some of those things.
For sure. Now, if someone isn't, again, like we're not needing to get deep into bicep training, but for some reason I want a neutral grip curl, I will quite commonly just program dumbbells. We can get the job done. And then I will sometimes, like us doing an incline hammer curl in itself, because again, the looking at the brachialis at least, for the brachialis specifically, like, it'll still be a little bit more lengthened bicep for the brachialis since it just attaches to your upper arm bone. Like elbows being a bit behind your torso versus next to it doesn't really make a difference in the length there. But I like the resistance profile we get there a little bit better. We just get a little bit more. We basically are challenged through a slightly larger range than when someone is standing for a hammer curl. So I do like in that instance like an incline hammer curl. But sometimes it's in a situation where it's like I just want to make this simple and like we're just going to do a standing hammer curl and it's not with dumbbells and it's not something we need to overthink too much.
Kind of like what Andrea was talking about too, with like, people whose like elbows are like pinned to their sides and they're like overly supinating. Like sometimes I'll just like put them on like a hammer curl.
Yeah,
And it's like, just don't worry about it. Just neutral grip it. Let's go. Let's rock with that.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Anything else in terms of hammer curls? Any other bicep movements y'all would like to nominate that we haven't mentioned?
Yeah, we have to give an honorable mention for the high cable curl, which I know a
Shout out to
lot
the
of
high
us,
cable curl.
yeah, which I know a lot of us use in our primers for folks, as well as like I do them every upper body training day as a primer. So kind of like to my earlier point about, hey, it's probably a good idea if we're doing some sort of elbow flexion when our arms are behind our torso, next to our torso, and in front of our torso. This also like, has us in like scapular like elevation and like we're kind of in that degree of like scaption and like shoulder flexion. And so basically what we have to stand to gain by doing some of these arm movements to assist with our shoulder function is they help stabilize the shoulder. They actually do a little bit more than like some of those like rotator cuff muscles, which are oftentimes like bearing the load. That's why everyone thinks that they have rotator cuff problems. It's like, oh, it's like my infraspinatus. My doctor said that my supraspinatus is problematic, and it's like, no, what's happening is those like little tiny stabilizers are just working entirely too hard because the bigger muscles aren't doing their job, and we can like the bigger muscles being like the lats, and we can assist those bigger muscles with some bicep training because again they attach at the scap, right? So by strengthening like these positions, so like shoulder flexion, scaption, like upward rotation, like things of that nature, we are just going to better help out those little tiny rotator cuff muscles.
The high cable curl is a really cool one that I think is again often forgotten. It's
I think it's like it's just not very fun or sexy because it's actually a difficult position to get into.
it
Like
is.
it really is. And like people are not good at it. And so by nature, they're not going to like it because they're not good at it. And you're also not going to be able to lift a lot of weight. So like it's really
Explain
not as like gratifying as like a preacher curl or something like that.
for those who don't know, will you explain what the position of this would look like?
So typically I would like to go like single arm with this just because it's a little bit easier to like line up. But you would basically kind of like find the spine of the scapula so that we can find this like scaption position here. So if you like draw a line at the top of the scapula and your arms like extending out, let's say like 30-ish degrees. I don't know. And then you kind
With
of
like
like,
2 o'clock.
yeah, there you go. And you kind of want to take your arm up, like so. If you're in this kind of extended position, and then we kind of like take our arm up through flexion, you're kind of gonna hit like this natural stopping point. This kind of like catch for anyone that's like watching along on YouTube. and it's going to be an elbow nice and high and like arms slightly in front of the body, and you're going to be kind of curling next to like your ear, if that makes sense. And so, like, what we'll see a lot of times, just like tie this whole series together, what we'll see a lot is like the elbow dropping. So people have problems like keeping their elbow nice and high, and then also we're gonna see them like lean back because you're gonna cue them like, hey, keep your elbow nice and high, and they're gonna do that by leaning back and essentially also flaring the rib cage. So that's what I mean when I said we're gonna tie this whole series together, back to like shoulder function. And so like people who are having shoulder issues, that's why this kind of positioning can be really beneficial for them to work on.
What do you think about the machines that put you into that position? So they're not very common, but there are ones where elbow pads are here. And
Yeah,
you're,
we have them.
yeah, I figured.
I'm too short for them. Like they don't fit me. Like it's like it hits me like up here or something.
Yeah. But is
Do you
there
have the
benefit to you actually holding that position rather than bracing the elbow in this case?
I mean,
because you're externally stabilized, you mean?
yeah, I would
Yeah.
say if you could like find one that fits, I think it could be like a good teaching tool. But it's like it's almost like that conversation that everyone always has about like what's better, machines or free weights. And like you could kind of go back and forth and make cases for either. I think it depends on like, I guess the conversation would be like, well, why is this in your program? Like, is this in your
Mhm.
program like for hypertrophy because we're like trying to drive like bicep tissue growth? Or is this in your program because we're like trying to like address, better function like at the shoulder?
Yeah. And I think for oh, I probably can speak for the three of us, and like that's not a hypertrophy movement in any of our programs. It's more for the function aspect of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, and you're just not going to be able, like, because we need to be able to like produce significant force
Hmm.
and tension for like hypertrophy to occur, and like it's just not a very good like force output movement. But working through these positions and getting better and stronger at them primes us and enables us to be able to exert more force on some of our other movements. So
For sure. Yeah, the machine variations. What like the FitLive has the Nautilus one, and then at the gym in San Diego, use the Hammer Strength one as well, which I actually like better than the Nautilus one. I was surprised. They're like very like short biased as well. So I mean, like there, I don't think you get as much carryover from like the functional perspective. Still some benefits, but I mean, it could be a way to like drive more volume if we want like a lot more short bias movements that aren't going to be as damaging. Um, it is another one where you get a good pump, but I feel like it's so rare that's actually available. Like I've never actually programmed a machine high curl for anyone. Cool.
it's like, I imagine that would be like some sort of scenario where like someone's like trying to like a physique competitor trying to get on stage and like their biceps are just like really a weak point, and we're dealing with like injuries that like preclude them from doing you know a different bicep movement. It's
Yeah.
like that's kind of the very niche like scenario that I could imagine that would come into play. It's fun to think
Yeah.
of. I don't have anyone
Uh,
that fits that description on my roster.
I have like 5 people I can think of on the roster like that right now.
Yeah, they're a dime a dozen, really.
Yeah. Anything else in terms of bicep training? Natalie, it looked like you were at some sick gyms in Guatemala. That one that was like it looked like it was like a garage gym. It just looked so grungy, but also just looked incredible, like the most fun place to lift at the same time.
I know. It was fun. I love gym tourism.
I do
And
too.
like I just happened to be staying in the places where like there were gyms really close by. I was like, this is perfect.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, it was very enjoyable. Some like really weird pieces of equipment I've never seen in my life and like couldn't even tell you what they are. But it's part of the
Hmm.
fun.
Cool. All right. Anything else to add before we wrap this up? All right. That is all we have for y'all for today. As always, thank you guys for tuning in. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor. Leave us a 5-star rating and a review. If you would like to apply for coaching with the team, click the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.